Dr. Richard Carrier, Dr. Dennis MacDonald. The earliest Christians believed in something that obviously neither one of us believe, pertaining to Jesus, and scholars wonder, what is it? What was the original teaching? Early church fathers argue, God, man, half man, half God, fully man, fully God, like all these different things. But what were, in your best estimation, the teachings of Jesus? What was his sacrifice? Like what?
Yeah, okay, that's funny. You asked two questions there, because right at the end you asked a different question.
I'm just throwing like a bunch of shit.
No, this is good, though. No, this is important, because it's important. People do that a lot, and so we should make those distinctions. So there's the question of what did Jesus himself think he was doing, right? And there's many reconstructions contradict each other, so there's many competing theories as to what the answer is. Several of them I think are plausible in terms of a historical Jesus. Some I don't think are plausible, but that's one question. And the other question is, after he died and Christians started believing, for whatever caused the belief in his resurrection, and what did they think then at that moment? Like, what did they think it was? And it's possible they started thinking that while he was alive. It's possible they started thinking that while he was alive and he kept denying it and say, stop saying that. And they kept on believing it anyway, just like Haile Selassie, right? So the Rastafarian religion is based on them having these wild beliefs about Rastafari being and also known as Haile Selassie, being the new coming of Christ. And Selassie himself is, Ethiopian royal. He said, no, I'm a good Christian. Stop saying I'm the second coming of Christ. I didn't give you those gospels. Stop worshiping me. What the hell is going on here? And that didn't stop them. Their own Messiah told them to stop, and they didn't stop them. And we have the whole Rastafarian religion in result. And so something like that could have happened to Jesus, where you have Jesus is teaching one thing, his followers are going around saying something else, and might even be telling him, stop saying that. But they went around doing it anyway. So that's a possible model as well, because we have actual historical models to show that can happen. So there's a lot of possibilities. They're endless, right? But there is two different questions. Is what did the first Christians, after the death of Jesus, think he was, or come to realize or believe that he was, versus what was he himself actually teaching at the time? And those might be different things. They might be the same things, or they might be different things. They might be overlapping things. I don't personally think the question is answerable. I think there's many plausibilities that are all fit the evidence, and that's as far as I can go. I'm more interested in seeing historians build defensible theories of historicity that actually address competing views, like the mythicism in particular, trying to build out something like that. Like let's say this, let's pick a lane and then see if that holds up or whatever. I'm more interested in seeing historicists do that. I don't myself want to exhaust time building out multiple models of historicity and testing them against each other. And it just doesn't interest me as an area of research. But I can tell you what I think is likely the first Christians started believing. And I think at the moment that they had the revelation, or maybe shortly before, when they said, when Paul says Jesus appeared to Cephas and the 12, like at that moment, some decision was being made as to what ideology to start selling. And I do think from the letters of Paul, it looks like that ideology was that they did believe, whether they believed this before or only just then came to believe it, that Jesus was an incarnate archangel, or the equivalent of an archangel, if you want to get semantically competing about the terminology. But they thought he was a divine being who had come down, assumed flesh, died to atone for sins, and then was resurrected and ascended back to God, and now is inspiring them through the Spirit to spread this gospel that will save the universe, basically. I do think that's what they came to believe very early on. And I give reasons for this and evidence for it on the historicity of Jesus. But that doesn't mean that Jesus himself was preaching any of that stuff. He might not have been. And in fact, I think the odds are he wasn't. But it's not impossible that he was, but he might have been. I'll give you an example of one model of historicity that I have actually advocated because I think it works so neatly, but I still don't think that that's any more likely than a dozen other possible models. But so I did this talk. It's one of my favorite ones, called "You're All Gonna Die," and I gave it on the Harold Camping's predicted day of the end of the world. This was a big deal like a decade or two ago, and Harold Camping predicted the world was going to end on a specific day. And so in Wichita, this atheist group held a conference and had me come and give a speech on where this idea of the apocalypse came from. So the title was "You're All Gonna Die," but the subtitle was, how the Jews kept failing to predict the end of the world and accidentally caused Christianity. So I start from the very beginning, from the flood myth and everything about how apocalypticism grows through contact with Zoroastrianism, and how the socio-political things, the invasion by Persia or the control by Persia and everything affects all of this. Go through like the master race theory that you get in some of the prophets, like Jeremiah. The Jews really did see themselves as the master race that were going to conquer the world, and yet they kept getting conquered instead. And so there's a lot of like hand-wringing about why this is turning out the exact opposite way we were told or believed God would turn things out for us. So you have all of this getting to predicting, and this develops into predicting the end of the world. And then you get all the way to Daniel, where they start putting timetables. And of course, Daniel's constructed to make people believe that the world was going to end right then, which when it was actually composed, it claims to be composed hundreds of years earlier, but it's actually meant to be war propaganda to get people like juiced up for this war against the Seleucids by making people think through this bogus timetable that they've come up with. And they're trying to fix a failed prophecy in Jeremiah. So like Jeremiah predicted what they thought would be the end of the world, and it didn't happen. And so there's this in Daniel 9, there's Gabriel comes and explains, oh, you got the math wrong. And it like goes through, like, no, okay, here's how you do the math. And if you do it this way, turns out it's like right around now it's going to happen. And so that's Daniel. But then it didn't happen. The end of the world didn't happen still. So you have all these other fringe apocalyptic sects, you see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls and so on, trying to reinterpret Daniel, just like Daniel's trying to reinterpret Jeremiah to get a new date. They're trying to get a new timetable. When is the end? When is the end? And then I conclude by going through all the Jesus Christs in Josephus. And there actually are several Jesus Christs in Josephus. He never calls them Jesus and he never calls them Christ. But this isn't the thing that I figured out. This is stuff that I got from the peer-reviewed literature, and I cite it on the historicity of Jesus. Other scholars have noticed this, that there are several figures that Josephus talks about that all come out and proclaim themselves like they're going to bring about the end of the world, basically, and they're going to defeat the Romans, and they all do some act that is exactly a duplication of what the original Jesus, Joshua, did. So like they're going to part the Jordan, or they're going to topple the walls of Jerusalem. There are all these things that Joshua, the original Joshua, did, who's of course the nationalist hero of Israel. He represents conquering the Holy Land. So to come around saying I'm the new Joshua is basically a militaristic statement saying that I'm going to reconquer the Holy Land, right? But that's Jesus. It's the same name. So these are guys representing themselves as the new Joshua, aka Jesus, and as the Messiah, as someone who's going to bring about the defeat of the enemy and bring about God's paradise, etc. So these are all Jesus Christs by our terminology. And Josephus is very carefully constructing these stories in this way. Now, there's two ways you can interpret that. One is Josephus is making this up. He's adding these details. He's turning them into Joshua's in order to have a veiled narrative of this messianic movement craze without freaking out his Roman audience, right? Without saying like, yeah, there were all these messiahs, and here, let me explain to you why we think there's going to be a messiah, etc. That's one option. The other option is that he's actually recording things that actually happened, that there actually was a rash of dudes, all of them trying to claim that they are the new Joshua and they are the new Messiah. So they're all Jesus Christ. There's a craze for people to pretend they're Jesus Christ. But if you follow the logic of Jeremiah and Daniel and so forth, the logic in Jeremiah, and the way that Daniel reinterprets it as well, is that the reason the end hasn't come is that the Jews are still sinning. And God will come when the Jews stop sinning. That's God's not going to fulfill his promise until you fulfill your side of the bargain, basically. So this is like, if you think like a lawyer here, okay, so when we get rid of sin, then you'll come and end the world. So what if we have a Messiah who dies and atones for all sins? Now all sins have been erased, you have no reason not to come, right? So the logic you can see from Jeremiah to Daniel to these guys, they might have actually been trying to literally get themselves killed on purpose, thinking that if they can do this, that this will bring about the end of the world. And if that were the case, then you already have this atonement theology, this sacrificial atonement theology is already a fashion that everybody's trying to get to happen. And so in that context, if this were true, if this whole model were correct, our Jesus might just be one of these guys. He just was a penny ante one compared to the ones that Josephus mentions. So he might have been. Jesus might have come in saying, "I'm the new Joshua. I'm the Messiah. I'm going to get myself killed to atone for all the sins of Israel, and therefore that will bring about the end of the world." It's as viable as Jesus being an armed, violent zealot, as some people have proposed. So, but the fact that it fits into this seems like a movement of these guys in Josephus. I think it's as plausible as any other theory of historicity. Now, do I think it's true? I don't really, I doubt it, but it could be true. It like I said, it fits the evidence neatly, and it would explain a lot. But it lacks the sort of confirming evidence that we would need to really nail this down and to like say, yes, this is what happened. But also where the evidence would be, the documents where the evidence would be, we don't have. So leaves us in a lurch, basically. And I find this a lot with historicity hypotheses, is that they all sound so tantalizing, but they all contradict each other, and they all have about the same amount of evidence for them, right? So I find it hard to pick and choose among the different historicity models.
Dennis, I know you might have something to say. I mean, you have a specific model I suspect you go by, but I do think it was interesting what he said.
Yeah, Dennis does. And Dennis also has another plausible model that I think would work in explaining
I'd like for him
Christianity.
to discuss, if possible, if you want to bring your model up after, it'd be cool to hear your thoughts about that model, because in Acts, just throwing out the fictional Acts, what I like about it is he's like comparing Jesus and Judas Galilean, and you got this guy, and then you got Mount Gerizim, and yeah, you have these figures, and they're definitely historical. These models of people who die. At least it appears that.
I think the author of Acts is literally lifting them from Josephus. Like, these are the same characters I'm talking about. Yeah.
Even though he's doing that, to me, I mean, let's be honest, right? There's no testimonium Flavianum when he's lifting this at this moment.
Correct.
All right, so we would all agree, at least partial or fully interpolated, doesn't matter. The point is that's not originally there.
Yeah.
So Acts is not seeing that.
Yeah.
But it looks like he's looking in similar sections that this would be found in. And what gets me is Acts is using this idea. If he's lifting it, let's just pretend that that's what is. I don't know, because I'm not.
Yeah, okay.
But he is. And then he goes, but Jesus, though he was killed, the movement keeps going on. And they even have like this apologetic in the mouth of what's the guy's Gamaliel?
Gamaliel, yeah.
And they're like, and he's like, listen, brethren, stop. This is how you know this one's from God. It's not like, here's the proof.
No, it's like, let it be. If it's not of God, it'll fail like all the others did. And if it succeeds, well, that just proves that it actually was from God. That's the argument. Yeah.
That's their friggin' argument. So, I don't know. I'd love to hear your...
There's a wonderful Homeric passage that inspires the Gamaliel episode, by the way, when one of the suitors challenges the other suitors and says, we ought not to kill Telemachus because the gods may punish us if we do so. So you have a Homeric image there.
Yeah.
But I want to both be critical of what Richard said and grateful for what he said, and to tantalize you with an introduction to another way of thinking.
Right, yeah.
Things. Cool. First of all, the criticism is, and you expressed it yourself, that you don't know that you buy this fanciful reconstruction.
Right, yeah.
For me, it's a fanciful but brilliant reconstruction.
Right, yeah, that's exactly how I would phrase it. Yeah, no, it was that one of the eureka moment when I see it. Oh, this is brilliant. Oh, but that doesn't really mean it's true.
Yeah, and one reason I would say is the pre-Pauline traditions about Jesus, and this gets back to Q, are not concerned about forgiveness of sins. They're interested in other people forgiving sinners.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
He came to call not the righteous, but sinners. And in fact, he has a lower threshold for sin than the Pharisees and other Torah enforcers. So you're right about the Hillel piece, but in some cases, in my opinion, he out-Hillels Hillel.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
So I think the issue of Jesus as the one who atones for sins is misplacing what his relationship to sinners is. It's rather to challenge...
In this, we're talking about the teachings, hypothetically, would be the actual teachings of the actual historical Jesus we're talking about.
Well, I want to be more careful about that.
Yeah, okay.
So, and this is one place where I'm sympathetic to your view. And I'm sorry that many of your viewers may not like this. I don't think we have preserved in an unambiguously faithful way any teaching of Jesus. Yeah. And I believe Jesus existed. And I don't think we have anything mediated through the Gospels and in the early church that is palpable to a historical person, but I still can make arguments for the plausibility of a historical person. The one piece that is often overlooked is the beginning of First John, where the author, who calls himself in the other epistles a presbyteros, that is an elder, with Aristion, according to Papias, who knew Jesus, what we have seen and heard and handled of the word of life we're handing on to you, which means that he considers himself among a number of witnesses
Don't
to
mind me. I'm
the historical
fighting insects.
to the historical Jesus, and he's going to try to transmit that to his community. And I don't want to get into the deep weeds with First John, but I think it's often misunderstood in terms of what it is.
You're saying he's saying he was a witness. To
Yes.
act, I actually knew the Lord.
The only text in the New Testament that claims to have known what seems to be the historical Jesus is that passage in First John. We have people who get visions of the risen Jesus. We have visions in the book of Revelation about Jesus, but this is the only one, and I tend to think it's a serious statement. That does not mean that even First John unambiguously and faithfully transmits anything that we can attribute to Jesus. So, that said, I think the Q document portrays a Jewish teacher. By the way, in the Q document, as I understand it, we do not have a Christian document. We have a Jewish document that likes Jesus. The same way and he's considered a prophet and a teacher. And he's the new Moses. And he's trying to make Jewish law more tolerable. This, another thing that Richard said that is really right is because Israel was outgunned by the Romans, Jews, especially Jewish elites, tried to make Israel faithful to the law because God had promised to Moses and Moses to Israel that it's when everyone obeys the commandments, God will bless them. And among the blessings is military victory. And so if you are outgunned and you have this theology, you want to be as pure as possible. Now, having those high expectations of purity, and by the way, Farsi probably comes from the Hebrew word for being separate, to be the ones who are separated off. And they're hardliners, and they have casualties. Soldiers, what do soldiers do on the Sabbath if they can't fight? What about farmers who have to get an ox out of a pit? What about tax collectors? The law would violate that. So I know we're running out of time on this one. I want to just wrap it up. Maybe we can pick it up at another time. I think without being able to say anything in the Q document comes directly from Jesus, I think we have his voice over and over in a consistent way. And the kinds of violations he accuses Jewish leaders of could get you crucified. Woe to you, Jerusalem! I wanted to gather your children like a mother hen gathers hens out of the. But now you look, your house is deserted. God has left the house; it's not going to be defended. And the threat against the temple that becomes so problematic for Mark, I think, was in the Q document. I will destroy this temple and build another. Not in 3 days, but I will build another not made with hands. That is a kind of heavenly. And this is related to the revolutionary stuff that you've been talking about. So, and there are other places where we have this vicious denunciation. I don't think it comes from Jesus, but I think it reflects a kind of movement that was anti-Torah Torah enforcement in Galilee. And then it becomes a problem in Judea with Sadducees and with chief priests. But I want to go back, so that's an overview, and I would be happy to fill in the picture. I think it was his Torah disobedience and challenge to religious authority that got him killed. By Romans, but probably with support of the Jewish establishment. But I want to go back to Josephus without defending the Testimonium Flavianum. I find it curious, and maybe there's a good answer to this, that there are a number of other places that a Christian scribe could have inserted Jesus into the narrative instead of where he does in Book 18. And why does he put it in the context of other Jewish troublemakers? There's a list of a number of people that are causing trouble.
It's actually a list of the actions of Pontius Pilate as well. So I think that's why they did. They're trying to shove it into a piece of the history of Pontius Pilate. So I think that's how they chose the location.
Well, no, that's actually a good explanation, perhaps. I'd like to see it again. But I wouldn't be surprised. That's all I would say. I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I should also add,
Josephus,
there's another reason. But anyway, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because right after that, if you notice, is another religious controversy that makes Judaism, elite Judaism, look embarrassing. Because it involves Rome and so on. So I wonder if that juxtaposition was intentional. They wanted to shove that in there so you would see this wonderful Jesus story, and then you would see this really debased, embarrassing story about Jews and the ISIS cult and so on in Rome. But that might also be
that's interesting. The way I had read it is you have this list of Jewish leaders that are causing trouble in Judea, and all of a sudden you find Jesus and his movement, which could be understood as more troublemakers. And then you have other troublemakers in Rome, showing that you have this sequence of troublemakers. So I'm more likely, I think it's fascinating to ask whether a Christian editor came by, saw Jesus in this list of nasties, and improved his PR by, so anyway, that would be an
rewriting
alternative.
It, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I could ask, as we wrap this up, if we factor in everything we've been talking to Dr. Carrier about, coming from a very skeptical mythicist position, a minimal mythicist, which means like he literally likes to play in the sandbox and go, well, if there was a Jesus, this could be it. I'm not convinced, but this could be it. And this is, he's playing, like, you can play with him. If I were to try and really pin you down and get you to be not your confidence or what you believe, so to speak, but if you were to really go and try to put biases to the side and say, okay, if I factor in everything I know, all the mimesis, everything that I look, and I don't even know the actual words of Jesus, let's just say, but I do think there was a guy, and you were able to recalculate the number you put on the confidence when I asked you before, would it be possible for you to go lower on your confidence level and maybe see mythicism as a possibility? Not saying it's more of a possibility, but is it possible that your confidence in it could be, if that's not true, and if this isn't true, then mythicism has a pretty good case, so technically I'll put myself at like 70% and 30%, whereas he puts 33, if you will, or 30%,
sure, yeah.
That there was a guy, 70% mythical. Could it be possible in your head you're actually the opposite of that?
Well, you want me to put a number on it,
Yeah.
and I will.
Okay.
And I would say that any responsible historian cannot be 100% sure. So we're talking about probabilities.
Right.
In my view, I'm going to hold to the 80 or 90%.
Okay.
Because I just think it's much more plausible to have the scenario I'm talking about. And again, this is a very interesting issue related to whether you think there's a Q document or not.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
And we really haven't gotten into the weeds on that one.
The other question is, when do you think the atonement theology arose? So basically the creed of 1 Corinthians 15, do you think that originated with Cephas or like shortly after the death of Jesus, or what do you think? Because obviously it doesn't come from Jesus.
Right.
And keep in mind, we only got like 3 minutes.
Okay. First of all, I don't know the answer,
Yeah.
but I think it comes out of the Pauline tradition and then infects the Johannine tradition at a relatively
So you think
early
it's
time.
Paul is developing that Cephas and the original apostles weren't
I don't know.
preaching? Oh, I see.
I don't
okay.
know. So, but
That would play
but
a role in how you guys would factor in the data, probably.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I just mean that's a model of its development, and I just didn't know where you stood
I
on
want to
that.
come back to one other thing you said. I think Jesus would be appalled if he read Pauline literature and the Gospel of Mark. I think he'd be embarrassed but pleased if he read Q. But he would not have condoned what became of him relatively soon after his death, and I think it was the catalyst of the Jewish war that spun out the gospel reaction, and why he became a hero of a certain kind, and why Homer was useful in embellishing the mythology. You can't do that with Paul. There must have been another impulse, and I think it was the scandal of having a religious leader die on a cross, and you have to make sense of it. So anyway,
Yeah.
So on that note, though, I don't only think Jesus, if there was a guy, right, I would say he was definitely with you on that. But not only him, could you imagine if all the 12, that whoever they were, read Mark? I mean, I like Steve Mason's take on this personally. There's many ideas, but I think Paul or Mark is making them dimwits. Yes, there's mimesis.
oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can show you that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we need to
yeah.
get into that at some point. 'cause
Yeah, and that's we were talking about that earlier, and I think there's two things going on there. I really love the idea that it's Odysseus' crew, right? It's that same kind of theme, but it's also Moses and the Jews in the desert. They're also acting like dimwits.
Yep.
So they see that those two narratives are similar, and so they can merge them and do something with this narratively.
Eclectic mimesis.
Yeah.
I love this. Thank you.